How is it that the Republicans went from the progressive anti-slavery party to MAGA? And how did the Democrats go from the right-wing party of the white supremacist South to the liberal party that just nominated Kamala Harris for president? Hi, my name is Keegan, and this is about the American party switch. There are three major event nodes: the 1960s Civil Rights Movement, the New Deal during the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the populist movement of the 1890s. People tend to only focus on Democratic President Lyndon Johnson, a major progressive, signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ended segregation and finally protected Black Americans' right to vote, particularly in the South, at least mostly. And after, in the 1968 election, Republican Richard Nixon ran on what's called the Southern Strategy, which was basically dog-whistling racism to the white South. Hence why those Confederate flag-waving white supremacists all vote Republican today. However, the party's ideological switch actually started in the 1890s. After the Civil War was won and Reconstruction ended, the Republican Party became increasingly overtaken by corporate elites. The Republicans became a coalition of establishment corporate interests and liberal reformers. Sound familiar? Now, in the 1890s, out in the western states, and by western I mean like Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Idaho, the left-wing third-party populist movement arose. In the 1896 election, the Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan, who was part of that populist People's Party movement, which was then largely absorbed by the Democratic Party. So the Democrats became the most bizarre coalition of conservative white supremacists in the South and progressive populists west of the Mississippi. Now, at the time, Congress was run by seniority, so the Southerners benefited from more Democrats being in office, but their positions of power, for example on committees, were not threatened. And the populists got a voice that the Republican establishment just wouldn't allow in their party. Remember, no primary elections back then. The populists were a progressive seed in the still right-wing white supremacist Democratic Party, and it was the 1930s that really turned things around. When the Republican deregulation and massive tax cuts for the wealthy of the 1920s led to the Great Depression, the Democrats swept into office in 1932 with the election of President Franklin Roosevelt. The economically left-wing New Deal created millions of jobs building our country's infrastructure, schools, hospitals, new houses for first-time homebuyers, airports, roads, bridges. Finally, Americans had union protections, a minimum wage, social security, protections against predatory banks, and welfare for the unemployed. This is when the Democrats became the party of working people. This massively helped working class and poor people and created the modern American middle class. And by the way, since Reagan, the New Deal has been slowly dismantled, and what do you know, the middle class has declined. The New Deal of the 1930s is when Black Americans started shifting over to the Democratic Party, a switch that firmly took hold after the Democrats outside of the South embraced the Civil Rights Movement. The Democrats became the party working slowly towards egalitarianism, particularly on race and gender, as the Republicans became the party of inequality and hierarchy. You'll notice progressives have always pushed this country towards egalitarianism of class, race, gender, while conservatives have fought to conserve white supremacy, men's power over women, and unregulated power of corporate owners. All that changed was the party label, and that's how the parties switched ideologies.